Hello and welcome to Core Vocabulary 101. Today's webinar will be broadcast live on September 24th, 2015. To ask a question during this broadcast, please type it into the text box on the right in the GoToWebinar window. We will collect these questions at the end of the webinar. The questions and answers will be posted on the Angelman Syndrome Foundation Communication Training Series Facebook page within the next week. This webinar is titled Core Vocabulary 101 because we are really going to focus on the concept of core, what it looks like, where it came from, what we do with it. So whether you have never heard of core vocabulary or you apply the concept daily, you should have an increase in your confidence and knowledge of this topic. Many of us live or work with individuals who have AAC needs, and we've heard of the term core vocabulary or core words. Here are some examples of how people might talk about core. So folks might say, we use core vocabulary boards, or we're focusing on core words. Our app uses core. He needs core-based vocabulary instruction. We're doing core modeling. Or she has a core word system. What these references don't really tell us is what core means, and we also don't know whether we have a shared definition of the term from these examples. So today we will clarify what we mean by core vocabulary. We'll learn where core vocabulary comes from, the features that are associated with it, and some of the benefits of using core vocabulary in your AAC systems. By the end of this hour, you should be able to identify systems that include core vocabulary and also begin to see how core words can be used flexibly. So let's get into core vocabulary and what it really means. I'd like you to take about 1 minute and think about how you would explain the concept of core vocabulary to someone else. This is just based on your own experiences with this, which again may be a broad range in this audience. You can write it down, you can say it out loud, see how it sounds. You can just think about it in your head. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about this, and then I'm going to give you some key questions that might help to guide your thinking. Okay, so now let's see what happens if I give you a little structure, if that's at all helpful. If we use our 5 steps profile and we think about core vocabulary, where would we think that core vocabulary would belong in this learning structure? So is core a student learning outcome? Is core an instructional approach? Is it part of an augmentative communication system? Is core vocabulary a method of progress monitoring, or is it a team resource? So just think a little bit with these guiding questions a little bit longer and about what core vocabulary is and how you'd explain it to somebody else. Okay, so even though this webinar format doesn't allow for us to share our responses, I thought it was important for each of us to get an accurate idea of how comfortable we really are with the concept of core vocabulary. It's one thing to be able to recognize something as being core or not, but it's definitely something quite different to be able to explain that to somebody else. And oftentimes that's the position that we're in. We will have some learning that we need to share with someone else. And so it's important that we can express that in a way that makes sense and that we're comfortable with. Doing that takes a really strong understanding. And so hopefully, if you did struggle with doing that in the last minute or so, by the end of this hour, you'll be much more comfortable with doing that. So let's look at a definition of core vocabulary that comes from the Practically Speaking AAC text, which is by Gloria Soto and Carol Zangari. It says that core vocabulary refers to high frequency, multi-purpose, commonly occurring words from a range of word classes that are a central part of an individual's AAC system. So, at its most basic definition, core vocabulary refers to words that are in an AAC system. More specifically, these words, in order to be considered core, must be high frequency words. They have to be multi-purpose, they have to be commonly occurring, and they have to come from a range of word classes. So I might think about core vocabulary as vocabulary that is frequent, flexible, many functions, and for all people. So that might be an easier way to think about it. In addition to that explanation about the flexible, frequently occurring range of parts of speech definition, Soto and Zangari also noted that core vocabulary is considered a learning target as well. So they indicated that instruction geared toward mastering conversation with core words should figure prominently in the individual's IEP. So this means that core vocabulary words should not only be a part of the augmentative communication system, but they should also be learning targets for the student as well. So if we go back to our 5 steps learning structure, we can see that the term core vocabulary actually appears in 2 different areas. First, core vocabulary is represented in the target section because core vocabulary defines the words that we have selected to teach and that we want our students to learn. In addition, core words are part of the tools section, which represents the person's communication display. I can look at a display like this, and I can see, based on the color coding and the words that are here, whether or not this is a core vocabulary system. I think it's important to show both uses of the term core in this diagram, because it is possible to have one application and not the other, and either one would compromise the augmentative communication system. So for instance, it's possible that I would have a goal to learn core vocabulary words or words across a range of parts of speech that are flexible, but then I may not have those words available on my communication system. Or I may have a communication system that includes core words, but then I may not have any goals to learn those, so they may not be targeted for instruction. So when we're evaluating for the presence of core in our AAC system, we really want to be sure that it is part of both the physical system and that it's represented in our goals. Let's look at some of the words that are considered core just to start to get familiar with the types of words that we're talking about. These words are flexible words, right? So they're kind of tier 1, if you know the reading terminology, generic, Lots of them are short, less than 6 letters, 1 to 2 syllables. Um, as you look at the list, you might be able to see that these words are they're common and they come from a range of different word classes. There's verbs here, there are pronouns here. I see some descriptive words. So we can start to see some of that range of parts of speech and even some of the flexibility potentially from this list. One of the things we don't really know when looking at this list, though, is about the frequency. So we don't know how often these words appear in conversational speech for English speakers or other speakers. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's look at how we might know what the most frequently occurring words in spoken language would be. So, unlike natural speakers, folks who use augmentative communication are really restricted to using the set of words and messages that we select for them. Because of this, it is really critical that the words we make available and that we teach them allow them to reach the same language and communication outcomes as their speaking peers. Naturally, then we're going to want to look to the speakers and see what words they're actually using so that we know what words are important to use in our AAC systems. That first part of our definition of core vocabulary said that words are high frequency, right? So in the study of language and augmentative communication, the determination of word frequency is often made by using a process such as the one outlined here. The researchers start by identifying a target group and a context. They then record all of the spoken words of the target group during a specified time frame. They transcribe their recordings, writing down all of the different words that are heard. And then the researchers note how many times each word is used by any one of the participants. In the end, all of the words that were heard are ranked from most frequently used to least frequently used. So here are the results from some of those frequency of use studies. The table describes the group that was studied and then the number of words that made up the majority of the words in their sample. For instance, in the first study on toddlers, just 23 words made up 96% of the total words used by that group. In the next study down, in the preschool studies, 80% of what they said could be captured with fewer than 333 words. So across all of the thousands of utterances, only 333 words were needed to express 80% of what they wanted to say. You can look down at the rest, but overall you can see that each study was able to account for nearly 80% of the vocabulary for their group with fewer than 333 words. So with over 1 million words in the English language, yet less than 350 were sufficient for any group to say most of what they wanted to say, that's pretty remarkable. So it should be noted that these studies, while not exhaustive of every combination, did include different contexts, folks of different ages, different environments, different activities, different abilities, different time frames. So there's a whole range of conditions that were included. And the results of their frequency lists determined that none of that mattered. The top words were essentially the same top words no matter what those variables were. There were the same range of parts of speech, and there were none or few nouns or noun-like words that were present on those lists. So that's really powerful to know that we could duplicate that across so many different groups and conditions. And that really gives us the information that we need to set up our AAC systems, right? So why would we not capture that and use that powerful information about the range of parts of speech and what words are most powerful in that top 350 to drive the words that we make accessible to our AAC users. Let's just take a look at some of the core vocabulary communication displays. Many of these are apps, since folks are certainly very interested in those these days. This is not exhaustive of all of the apps available, but I wanted to give you an idea of some of the names and the visual representations of some of the communication displays. So this is an app called Sonoflex Lite, and one of the things you can look for is what Gail Van Tatenhove called talking in a rainbow, which is how many different colors do I see represented? And because the core words are often color-coded by part of speech, the more colors you see, the better, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to say a lot of different things or represent a lot of language functions. So I can see here there's lots of different colors here, and that's a good sign that there's multiple language functions. This is a custom page set that was created for the Go Talk Now app, but it includes pronouns and action words and describing words, and then links to some of the other core words, as well as some fringe words or nouns and extra words, so that the student can have access to core words as well as other vocabulary, even though there's only 25 targets on maximum per page. Here we have the Prolo Quote to Go, and it has 45 buttons on this particular page set, and then we have the same set of vocabulary but with 60 buttons. And we'll talk about a little bit later the differences in the color coding, but this is an example of one high-tech page set that uses a particular color coding system that from Goossens, Elder, and Crane that is different than some of the other systems. Here is another custom page set. It's for Prolo Quote to Go, but again, we have our range of colors, and you can maybe start to see some of the types of words that are represented. Here is a low-tech paper-based system that is made by Deanna Wagner, and again, we see a rainbow of words. What you don't see are orange words, which are nouns, because again, the core really doesn't include nouns. Those were really relegated to the 20% and were not represented in the top 80% of the words used. So this is the Avaz app with 45 buttons per page. This is a Pogo Boards display with 35 buttons on a page and organized with the different parts of speech sort of in sentence format. And the last one here is the Touch Chat with Word Power, and there's 42 buttons, and that again includes the ranges of parts of speech. So I just wanted to include a few of the things that people will say regarding programming vocabulary and making communication displays, the challenges about including all of the words that they would need, and we never have the right words, and we're not getting anything more than requesting, and who's going to program, or all of the answers would be core vocabulary. So we can, if we have a good, strong core-based system, we know that we're probably going to meet about 80% of our expressive needs for individuals that are using those 1 to 2 into the 3-word utterances in particular. And another thing to note is that, again, core vocabulary, as the studies showed, is not age-specific or ability-specific. So one of the maybe misinterpretations of core is that it's a simplification of a communication system, and that is not true. Core vocabulary is not a simplifying, it's kind of a distilling down to the essential elements or essential pieces that are needed, or most important pieces. So that would apply across any range, and individuals who are speaking in multi-word utterances with their devices would still continue to use core vocabulary like anyone else, just as an early user or learner would for language. They just may be adding some more vocabulary in with those core words. So let's look at how we might know where to find some of the specific vocabulary word lists. Okay, so I showed you an example of a word list. Again, because there's so much overlap, you can go from one list to another and you're going to see a lot of the same words are present. These slides coming up will show you some of the sources that I have used and others use as sort of their go-to places for looking for word lists that would support an AAC system. Just also note, though, that if you have one of the apps that I just talked about, the TouchChat, the Avaz, the what else? The Sonoflex, Proloquo, those come pre-programmed with good, strong core-based systems. So you really don't want to fool around with that. You really want to leave that intact. And there's really no need to add other words to that system. So these vocabulary lists are there for your reference, but by and large, if you have a strong core-based system, you're not going to have to bring this information to bear on that. This might help you to evaluate your own system, particularly if you have a paper-based system or a system that I haven't talked about, and to determine, do I have core words in this system, and do I how many of those top 100, 200, 300 words are represented. So Gail Van Tatenhove and her website here, vantatenhove.com, does a wonderful job in lots of areas of explaining what core vocabulary is, how to use it, applications in the classroom. I mean, she is really sort of the queen of core, and the first person that I heard speak on the topic and really kind of lit a fire under me many years ago to move on using more core. So she has some great resources. Also, Bruce Baker is definitely had done seminal work on the use of core words, and his work with the semantic compaction and MinSpeak and some of the Pranky-Romic devices. So the website minspeak.com has some great resources for vocabulary lists as well as other applications for core vocabulary. The University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Center for Literacy and Disability Studies has some nice sources of information related to the dynamic learning maps alternate assessment, and the DLM alternate assessment is using core vocabulary to support the assessment process, and there's certainly much more information on the website about that, so you can look for that. The University of Nebraska Lincoln has some wonderful core vocabulary lists and other lots of different lists actually that you can look at for special populations that might help to identify some of the keywords that you want to make sure on say a preschooler's communication system, or if you're kind of doing some personalization, those are some nice places to look. The other thing that is included in the University of Nebraska Lincoln website is a list of references. So if you want to know where those vocabulary lists come from, rather than put all of those references across the slides, I'm linking you to this particular website, which includes links to all of the original lists that you might find across the website. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, that's where you want to go. So let's talk a little bit again about the flexibility of core vocabulary. So what we've talked about the frequency and how often it's used by a speaker, that relates to the frequency, but what makes something flexible? We have that definition, we have our word lists, and we know where those word lists come from. So what other types of things would make a word powerful? And I think in order to do that, it would help to understand the difference between the core words and other types of words. So here we see in the first column the features of core words. So we've talked about the range of parts of speech and frequently occurring and flexible. And then in the second column, we have other words that are supplemental to the core that we're calling extended vocabulary. So that includes things like personal core, so words that are personal to the user that are very important to them in their communication. We have generic school core, colors, numbers, letters, shapes, those types of things. We have grammatical markers like word endings. We have binders, small words that bring things together. We have word altering strategies, so things that change the format of the word. And then we have what is called fringe vocabulary, which is often content nouns, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about. It is fine to have a system that includes both core and extended vocabulary. What we want to remember, though, is that we don't overrepresent that extended vocabulary. So remember that 80% rule. 80% of what speakers use is core. Let's try and use that same rule when we're modeling and when we're creating communication systems in terms of the representation of core in those main pages and the visibility and availability. So let's see. This is an example of a communication board that is created with fringe vocabulary or mostly nouns. So you might be able to see the difference between this and the ones that we've seen with lots of color. This is sort of a typical topic board, and it's really limited to one part of speech, and it doesn't really allow the user to do anything but indicate a choice, so to request something. What we'd like to see ideally is that the core vocabulary that we have, the features of that as different from the fringe would be that there isn't just a one-to-one correspondence between the word and its referent. So while a fringe word, like if we go back and we see juice or popsicle, there's really one meaning for popsicle. There's not a whole lot of other options. Whereas if we take a word like, let's see, clean, that can have a whole bunch of meanings depending on how we use it. So that leads us into the second feature, which is the word can be used to mean different things depending on the setting and the partners and the topic. And we'll look at an example of that. There's lots of opportunities to use the word in natural, meaningful context. So the word popsicle is not going to come up a whole lot, but the word clean might. You can combine that with lots of other words, including core words, to expand the meaning. So combining two core words together can change the meaning. It can give you more detail and more information. And there's an opportunity to express a range of language functions with the flexible core. So let's do a little comparison of core to fringe. So here's a core word, different, and then here's a fringe word, granola bar. And we're going to look at these features that we just talked about for each of those words. So we're going to talk about, can you use different to mean more than one thing? Yes. So different doesn't have a specific connotation, whereas the granola bar really does. Can you use the word different in multiple contexts and have multiple meanings? I'll show you some examples of that, but yes, the word different, depending on how it's used, does have multiple meanings. The granola bar, again, does not. It has one meaning, and that's really it. We could certainly use the word different lots of times across the day. I would say granola bar, we might be able to use it once a day. Lots of combination potential for the different, not so much for the granola bar. And can we do things more than label and request as a function? For different, absolutely. And instead, for the granola bar, not so much. It's mostly to say there's a granola bar or I'd like a granola bar, but not so much to comment about granola bars. So what we see is the word different ticks all of the boxes, and the granola bar does not. So in a minute we'll talk about the role of the fringe, but we can see the how to compare if a word is core versus if it's not, and some of the benefits of having that core. So here you see an example of how this one core word could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, no pun intended, depending on the context. What you see here is really the heart of the core vocabulary concept, because if we had 300 words that meant 300 things and that was it, then we really haven't gotten any good real estate out of that AAC system. But if we have 300 words, each of which can mean almost 5 or more things, then wow, that really exponentially improves our system. So in this instance, you see different, and here it means new. I want a different book. I use that all the time for kids to rather than name a specific book, we just say different, and then we look for a different one. It can also mean dissimilar. Your picture is different than mine, so it's not the same. It can mean unequal. This number is different than half than that one, so they're not the same. Subtraction. They are different by 5 spaces, so using that as a subtraction term. And then also strange, he's acting differently. So these are just a couple of examples of how one word can be applied to many situations and have a different meaning depending on the situation. So what in some instances, core is going to be combined with the extended or the fringe vocabulary to create communication. And then in other instances, in many instances, especially early on when individuals are using single words or 2 words, the core will derive meaning from the environment in which it's used. So core doesn't have to be combined with extended vocabulary to have meaning. That basically the core can be combined with itself, or in many, many instances combined with different contexts to have different meanings. So core plus context equals communication and meaning. And let's take a look at one of the examples of a core word where, depending on the context, we're getting different meanings. Here we have the word turn. So in the context of reading the book, turn by itself could mean turn the page. When I'm playing a game and I point to turn, that might mean it's your turn. If I have a toy and I point to turn, maybe I'm saying, I want to turn. When watching the TV and I point to turn on my display, maybe it means turn the channel. When we're listening to the radio, turn can mean turn it up or turn it down. Taking a bath, turn might mean turn the water on or turn it off. When we're driving the car, turn might mean turn the corner. And if I say it to a person, maybe I would like them to turn away and not look at me. So all of these different contexts, one word, all of these different meanings, and you can look at and see what language functions are represented here. So some of them might be requesting an action, some of them might be making a statement, things like that. Just thinking about the core words that were reviewed for week 1 of this training series. I, want, like, and not. I just took the same context and I put those 4 words across the top, and now I could think about, if I was reading the book, how might I use the word I? How might I use the word want? How might I use the word like? How might I use the word not? And this becomes my map, or kind of roadmap or cheat sheet for those activities to remind me of what I might say with each of those core words. And certainly you can individualize the context so they're more applicable, but I wanted to show you that the same list can be used for different core words in planning. And I think writing out and pre-planning is pretty critical for the core vocabulary interventions for the adults, to kind of map ahead of time what you're going to be doing. Okay, so let's just talk for a minute about some of the drawbacks of using noun-based systems as part of the extended vocabulary. So this is not having a balanced system where you have core plus nouns. This is for those folks who might have had experience or are experiencing or are struggling with letting go of a system that is predominantly based of nouns or only includes nouns. So I call this beware of the perception of progress, because I see learning the names of nouns or learning lots of nouns is sometimes alluring and attractive because it feels like we're moving forward, but the fact is we know that those words are not powerful. So it may appear that we're making progress as we check off all of the farm animal names that we know or the food names, but in fact it's more of a perception of progress, because without those core words, these really don't add a whole lot to a person's communication system. So one of the first things that people might say is, well, if I'm going to be looking for teaching materials to support communication, look at all these things I have, right? I have Artic cards, or I have objects in the classroom, or objects at home that I can use, and it is true that it is more difficult to match the core words to different appropriate situations. I can't go and find the word have out there in the environment. But once you become familiar with the process of translating situations into the core, similar to what we just showed with the turn, it actually becomes easier because those core words are more flexible and more prevalent. So initially it's a little harder to find places to use those words because they're not, it's not lunchtime and food is there. But once you get used to the process, it does get a lot easier. Okay. I think this is also a big attractor, is folks think about requesting objects as an early communication function. So why wouldn't we start with that? Well, I would say that this is true, but commenting and protesting and greeting and others are also early functions. And yet those don't seem to make it into those same communication systems. So I think it's less of a function of it being an early language feature and more about the fact that objects are easier to represent, which we'll talk about. There's so many nouns to learn. So, look, we have lots of nouns. Why not, get started and learn them, and they're prevalent in the environment, and maybe I'm even feeling successful. So why wouldn't we start teaching those? We have a long way to go, and it's a good thing to get started on. It's true, there are lots of nouns. Ironically, nouns are things, and they're often tangible and already present in the environment during interactions. So being able to name them often doesn't really add to the interaction. So if I'm in an art and there's paper and pens and pencils in front of me, I can use those right there as communicative props and then say something about the thing I'm doing, describe it, or give an opinion about it, or make a comment, or social, or so ironically the things are actually already in the environment in front of us. They're in that communicative context. It's what we want to say about those things that's not there, and that's what makes it so important to have that core. Symbols look more like they're referent than the abstract words. Well, there is no doubt about that a granola bar looks more like the picture of a granola bar than the word want looks like want. Here's what we know. Symbols take on meaning through use. So regardless of what connection we think is there, people learn symbols by systematically pairing them with meaningful applications. What that means is whatever symbol you're looking at, if you're using it in a meaningful context, that child will learn that symbol, no matter what it is. You just have to pair it meaningfully. And I want you to think about text. What are all of those little black lines and sticks and circles and things like that? They're nothing until we repeatedly see them together in a context and we go, oh, that's the word progress, because I know what that looks like. Well, that doesn't have any relationship to the concept of progress, but I've learned that this envelope means this word, and the meaning of this word is this, other definition. So it's just through association that we've learned that, right? There's no actual relationship between the idea of progress and the word. So this is where the aided modeling is so critical. Nouns represent what he wants to say, or it's necessary because we need to motivate him to use the system. Nouns often represent what a person has had the most opportunity to say. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing. Yes, it may be true that at this point, this person is predominantly using requests, and maybe we can even document that. What I would suggest is I imagine that they've had many years of experience with being successful with requests and not having other communicative functions encouraged or fostered or made available to them. So we don't know what would happen if this person had more options for language functions. What we do know is then when individuals are limited to single words, we often interpret the function as a requesting function. So if I were to say shoe, and that's it, then you are likely to interpret that as a request for me to have my shoe, as opposed to a comment or a social, interaction thing, etc. So we sort of create that situation ourselves, and the way out of it is to provide more diverse vocabulary across those language functions, and to model the use of that quite simply. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the core vocabulary, what it looks like. So we have talked a little bit and seen a little bit about color coding. The most basic color coding is the Fitzgerald key, which was originally developed as a kind of a coding system that wasn't even visually based. It wasn't colors, it was symbols actually. And it was six symbols and now 6 colors that were used to represent different parts of speech. So here you see what color coding would look like if you use the Fitzgerald key, which is sort of that original set of these symbols, and then these colors were used to represent those parts of speech. This is the modified Fitzgerald key color coding. So subsequent to the 1920s, we had gone in and taken and expanded out the colored system of the Fitzgerald key and sort of called it the modified key. And this is the standard color coding that is used for the modified Fitzgerald key. So you might hear that term, and basically what that means is just if you have a pronoun, the background or the border would be colored yellow, and that would be a standard color for using the modified Fitzgerald key. And it can be useful for using that rainbow. It can be useful for combining words. So I might have a child that says go, and I say, oh, we need a yellow word. And so it can be helpful that way. And also, as you'll see in a minute, it can be helpful in just differentiating one set of words from another. Here's another option, and this is actually the color coding system that I often use. Brown can be a different color, which is used in the modified key for adverbs, and that can be a difficult color as a background. So sometimes it's a matter of practical. Basically, you can use any color coding system that you want, as long as you're consistent with for the user. So don't switch it up for a particular user, but if you're using one color coding system and it works, there really isn't any need to change to another system just to match up with something else. This was the Prolo Quota Go and the Pod, both use the Goossens Crane and Elder system. Which is some early work in the field of augmentative communication around some communication displays, and this was the color system they used. So you might see this in a few apps. Here I wanted to show you the same set of 112 words that were generated by Gail van Tatenhove based on those language samples, and in this instance they are not color coded. And then here I just added a colored background to those cells, and you can see it really does help to kind of find yourself on the page. It's certainly easier maybe to look at the colored version and find something than it would be to look at that black and white. Some of the other variations in the displays that you can think about would be symbols. So what symbols should I use with core vocabulary? You can use any symbol system that you want. There is no specific symbol system that is designated as core. So core has to do with the words that are used and the meanings, and not the symbols. How many symbols should I use? You can use any quantity. There's no specific quantity, but within this training series, we're recommending a minimum of 100 as part of your base system, and then you focus on specific learning outcomes within that. And up to 300 would really cover you for a lot of the 80% core words that were represented in some of those vocabulary lists. So you really want a sufficient quantity of words across all of the different parts of speech so that you can represent those language functions. In terms of the location of core words, it's really a core-based system if the core words are front and center. So if you have your core words buried somewhere in the system, then it really isn't a core-driven word. Really, you want your core words to occupy the majority of the main display space, and then those fringe words to be supplementary or kind of in addition to your core words. So do place the core words as much as possible on that main page, and then navigate from there to other fringe or extended vocabulary. Color, again, pick a system and stick with it, and then this works with light tech or with high tech. It doesn't matter which system that you use. So I think what we'll do is just do one more quick application of the core vocabulary, because we are going to have I'll show you an entire webinar on descriptive language and non-directive language. So basically that would help you to know how to identify appropriate core words to use in different situations, and how to map those in the day, and how to use the core. So now we've just really talked about what core is and how to identify it, but we didn't really talk too much about the applications. So just know that that would be part of our descriptive language and non-directive language webinar, which is coming up in, I believe, October. So what we'll do is just skip ahead, and did want to try one thing. I'm not sure if this display is quite big enough, but maybe we could just do this together. Here's the 112 or 150 word display that I used. I've created that, and based on Gail van Tatenhove's 112 words. So when I finish my workshop, sometimes what I'll say is I'll put this up, or folks will have their own version, and I'll say, okay, it's the end of the day and you've had enough and you want to be finished with this activity. How many ways can you think of to say that using only core words? So I'm not sure how visible this is on your screen, so I don't want you to be squinting to see it. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can pause and either look at the core display on paper, or um, you can look at it on screen. But I'm just going to move ahead in the interest of time and show you some of the ways that we used core words to express the concept of, um, I'm ready to go home, or I want to leave, or something like that. So here we have up top here, color coded so that it makes it maybe easier, some of the ways that folks have come up with of saying they want to be finished. So you could say tired, and in the context of I'm at a conference, I'm talking to you, and you say tired, I probably would understand that that meant you're tired and you're ready to go. You could say go. You could say break, like I need a break. You could say stop, home, take a walk, do different, like I'd like to do something different, do next, or what are we doing next, or I want to do something that's happening next. Want out, pretty straightforward. Quiet, stop talking. Don't like, ready, out, next, or when, go. So you can see a nice rainbow in here. We have some red, blue, purple, pink, green, that type of thing. And we could have put pronouns in, and we could have linked up lots of different words, but I just wanted you to get a taste for how we would potentially apply this small set of words in flexible ways to different messages that may not be present on this particular list. So just before we go, some ideas for possible next steps. Take a look at the system that you have and see if you can see if it's core based. Do the words that you have on your list align with the words that you've seen on the screen, or are there more predominantly nouns? And try and look for that 80-20, like 80% of the words that I'm using and that are on that main page to be core words, and then 20% to be that fringe. See if you have core vocabulary learning targets. Look at your IEPs. Are they focusing on the range of language functions for kids and using flexible words, or is it naming nouns? And then maybe potentially follow up with one link from this webinar. Because the PowerPoint is in PDF, we will be creating a list of the links that is in an editable document so that you can click on those live links and navigate to some of those pages. And we'll post that on the Facebook page as well as the angelman.org page, so that you can won't have to go back and find those links and type them in yourself. And what you'll find at the end of the handout for this webinar are a bunch of different resources, some wikis, some websites, some articles, some of the lists and things like that. The Practical AAC website is a wonderful website for lots of core vocabulary supports and very user-friendly. I could highly, highly recommend that. And then some of the other things that we talked about. So I thank you for attending this workshop. And thank you for the ASF Communication Training Series that is made possible by the Angelman Syndrome Foundation and a generous grant from the Foster Family Charitable Foundation, a family foundation established in Central California. Have a great day.